is the social currency of these kids today.
PATER, NOSTER and the Mission of Light, written and directed by Christopher Bickle. Now this is a kind of interesting throwback 70s movie in some ways, although it does take place in modern America. It is an interesting movie that I would kind of best liken to the movie Antrim meets Clerks. That sounds like a random mixture, add in a bit of Waco and you're more or less there. What's the story? It focuses primarily on a young girl called Max, and she works in a kind of independent record store, like a vinyl store, with a host of her colleagues, and she happens across a very rare LP from this hippie commune from the 70s, and she basically tracks down to find out where it came from, and she finds that there is some other ones that she's managed just to pick up, and she's a massive record collector. Now she's actually contacted by this hippie commune who finds out that she's interested in their kind of records and things, and they invite her to come and visit. She wants to bring her friends, so this group of young people get invited to this very secluded and private sort of cult, for lack of a better word, out in the forest. They're blindfolded, and when they get there, they're all excited because this is like these, you know, no one's heard from these guys for years. But things take a darker turn when this cult seems to have sinister intent. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about it. Now, lots to discuss in this movie. Let's just say right off the bat, I don't think this movie will be for everyone. It has loud, chaotic, surreal, and somewhat kind of art house vibes. But I think if you can accept that, then there's a lot to enjoy in this movie. Let's talk about what works. Let's talk about the actual setup of this movie. This is like the first act of this movie, and this is where it's mostly like Clerks in a way. It focuses on this kind of collection of characters, the majority of whom work in this record store, and there's a couple of other kind of other guys who kind of tag along as well, but they're all sort of music aficionados, and I think they really capture that hardcore sort of collecting and that music kind of people who are just super into it and are hardcore into this kind of scene, this indie kind of like record collecting and looking for rare vinyls, and how your world is influenced by music and things. I mean, once upon a time I used to be kind of well into the kind of the music scene, but I was never a kind of hold a candle to these guys. But I really think they actually capture the essence of this group of people who are just so into this kind of scene. It really feels authentic. And the first act of the movie, even though it's not a comedy, it has a sort of fun, sort of light vibe to it. A kind of, that's just why I liken it to Clerks almost. This group of employees that work in this record store. There's a few kind of like sort of jokes early on about the sort of the stereotypes of questions that people might get asked in retail generally, but also specifically in this kind of record shop thing. It's almost like these are the kind of the questions that we always get asked whilst working in a record shop, and things like this. They make a little bit of a sort of a few kind of comedy scenes from it, even though I wouldn't say this movie it would be classed as a horror comedy. There's a few scenes certainly in the first act of the movie, and this kind of group of employees, you know, they're friends outside of work, and the three of them plus another girl and this kind of drummer from this death metal band end up kind of going to this this cult. And I've got to say, I just thought these characters seemed very realistic in a way, but in a way that's not like super like drama. It's very light. It's very light. These are a group of young adults kind of living life. They're out partying and stuff like that. but you kind of felt the authenticity, maybe here is what I'm kind of saying. So I thought the setup was very strong, and the kind of the relationship to these characters and music cannot be understated. And I think they do a good job of really selling you that these guys are really into this kind of world, and you believe them. And then we kind of go to this cult, and it all seems very serene at first, and I think they do a great job of capturing this kind of like 70s hippie vibe. And as the movie progresses, you know, drugs are taken one way or another, and it starts to get trippy, and it really then leans into that sort of 70s sort of acid trip vibe, but with a kind of a horror edge. I mean, obviously there was some great, you know, horror movies coming out of the 70s. And maybe this is where that kind of, that Antrim influence comes in, because it does get pretty dark. Now, obviously, we're talking about a cult, hence the kind of the Waco connection here. And as the film progresses, we learn more and more about what this kind of cult is up to. And it ain't good, but I think for the most part, every kind of actor here really sells their part. You know, a group of young people, protagonists, and these cultists, most of which are quite old now. They're all sort of, you know, well, they say that they've kind of extended their life through various means, but they're all sort of in their sort of 50s and 60s and beyond, really. So you can believe that they've been out in the woods for all this kind of time and doing their, you know, the kind of like shenanigans and stuff like that. But then the movie kind of shocks you into some pretty brutal gore scenes. And I was like, geez. I mean, it gets pretty brutal at times. And the thing is, the movie's relatively light until then. So it sort of hits you like, man, that kind of hit hard. And, you know, I got to say, because I think the characters are relatively well defined and sort of... And then, with some flaws, and I'm going to come on to that, but the flaws... in a way, give it authenticity, despite, I think, it makes it a little bit unlikable at times, but we'll come on to that. But yeah, you know, authentic characters. And, you know, we learn more about what this kind of cult's kind of plans are, and it's all pretty dastardly and things. And yeah, you know, it really goes into that 70s vibe, and you using this kind of like this music, which I believe they actually recorded music and released an album like for this and stuff in this kind of 70s kind of vibe, and it definitely, I think, captures that sort of that era and the vibe here and the feeling of the Woodstock sort of style of kind of people that kind of existed at this point. So that was all pretty good, and I think you get a real sense of helplessness that one of our protagonists kind of realise that, okay, we're in a little bit of trouble now. It genuinely feels pretty dangerous for them, and what's kind of going on, and how deep and you know, these kind of, they're in trouble. And even some of the kind of the more philosophical kind of moments where we have some dialogue about how people perceive these kind of hippies and some of their kind of the beliefs about the church, for example, and stuff like that, and how they view sort of science and things. There's some interesting kind of little philosophical moments here and stuff as well, and some reasonable kind of special effects. Now, I understand this is a very low budget movie, but I've got to say, I think the special effects are pretty good, and I've got to say, there is a taste issue with this one. I do not think the kind of, as I say, the loud, chaotic nature of this movie will be for everyone. But if you're somewhat open-minded, I've got to say this is actually a pretty good movie for the most part. I do have some critiques, but I've got to say that my critiques are on relatively minor points. So let me just kind of get let me just kind of get them out of the way, and then we'll conclude. So, what are my critiques? Our main girl, Max, I have to say, she is selfish. She is a selfish character, and there's no getting around it. And so, in the way, she's kind of unlikable, particularly at one point in the movie. But the movie never really addresses that, I would say. But in its defence, although the character is certainly not altruistic, I maybe think, do you know what? as much as that character is definitely selfish, and maybe the movie doesn't acknowledge it, but maybe that would be a realistic things that happen. Let me just sort of say that. Maybe the average person may kind of be like that. So it's certainly not having a super altruistic main character. I'd be interested to know if that was actually a deliberate choice, or whether that was just happens to be that something that maybe they haven't thought about. But it said to me, wow, this character out of all of the protagonists is pretty selfish. I think there are a couple of technical elements here that kind of bothered me a little bit. The last act of the movie, as I say, it's loud, it's chaotic, there's lots of kind of like psychedelic music, sound effects and visuals. And there are some plot points that are kind of delivered via dialogue. And because all this kind of like malaise of noise and things like that is going on in the background, I have to be honest with you, I found the dialogue a little bit hard to make out at times, because there's just such a racket going on, to be honest. And I thought, I can't quite make out what people are saying, because the movie is so chaotic, both audio and visual. So that was a little bit of an issue when I especially thought they were delivering some relatively important exposition and things like this. So there's that. There's one or two elements here that I felt were a little out of place. We have these two security guards, and they to me seemed out of place. Out of all of these cultists, these sort of stuck out as like, I didn't really feel they fit in. They kind of wearing these bright pink jackets and have all medals on and have like big bulbous kind of like boils all over their face, and they act a bit like doofuses, if that makes sense. They act a little bit like, you know, they're not the sharpest tools in the box, shall we say, but they're different from everyone else, and no one else acts like that. None of the other cultists act like that. I think they seem out of place. They seem like they're in some type of parody movie, and as such, I think the kind of the authenticity that is built through a lot of the other parts of the movie is lost with those guys, because they just seem a little bit too sort of goofy at times and a little bit too silly. Now, as I've kind of said a couple of times, I think there may be a certain amount of taste for this, because it's a lot of kind of surreal stuff going on, and it gets chaotic and loud. And I've got to say, maybe they kind of, I get where they were going, and I understand the decision to have the movie as is, but part of me thinks they could have trimmed down some of these kind of sequences, because I do feel maybe it just kind of hangs around with certain scenes just a little bit too long at times, and the kind of, it just becomes a little bit of a, and I get that's the point. But at times you're thinking, oh man, you know, I mean, I had to go and like turn my volume down, because I like my neighbours just think, what the hell's going on? But it just seems a little bit, I think, too chaotic at times. And I understand that's the point. But I think it could have still got the kind of the message across without kind of feeling like it's overstaying its welcome in certain scenes. So that's my critiques. I think the acting is as I say, is solid outside of a couple of like written people, but a good level of authenticity with a real kind of like running the gambit in tones in regards to the journey that these kind of characters go on, from a quite light and breezy movie at the beginning with kind of a fun Clerks type vibe, for some pretty visceral horror towards the end, and a real authentic 70s feel to it. I think most people who enjoy stuff on this channel may want to check it out. It isn't perfect, as I say, but I think it's worth a watch if you feel like that might be something you're interested in. Although I can understand people not being interested in a kind of a loud, brash, chaotic, noisy film like this. It's a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.